Today's podcast will be the last one concerning anything with the Constitution. It's going to be about the 13th Amendment, and then we'll be going on to other different things to discuss within a historical or political nature. But first, I want to bring up that people have the option to help me out by becoming a patron at my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/challenge history. It starts by going $1 and $10 and $25. Then the $50 and $100 if you donate those levels. Once I get enough people on those levels, I will be doing giveaways, and those are going to be at the $50 level. As a yearly thing, I will be doing giveaways for a Roman silver coin at the $50 level and a Byzantine gold coin at the $100 level. For anybody who is interested, and that allows you to basically be in a giveaway for those points. With it, I would initially I'm going to do one a year with it, but as the amounts, if the amounts grow beyond those levels with it for people donating with it, beyond a few of those levels with it, I'll probably extend that to basically, I might, if I get quite a few people at those levels, I might extend that out to being as many as much as down quarterly giveaways if I start to get quite a few people at those levels. If it starts to get to where I'm getting a lot of money from those people, because I want to make sure that I'm actually making it worthwhile for people that are donating. Now at the lower levels with it, I haven't really decided what type of giveaway to put on those, but that'll be determined on how many people I get on those levels, and it will have to be something of lesser value. But these are things that I am considering on top of those levels. So back to the idea of the 13th Amendment. First thing is to read obviously the 13th Amendment. They give a note in here, portion of the fourth of Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution was superseded by the 13th Amendment. Now this is basically when it came to the idea where individuals could have people that were in basically they were essentially bound to labor, could essentially have them returned to return and have them finish off their actual basic owed labor to the person. Now that was essentially ended by the 13th Amendment. It was passed in January and ratified in December of 1865. But in Section 1 we see neither slave nor involuntary servitude except in punishment for a crime whereof the party shall be duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And Section 2 is Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. And this has a lot of different points in which it becomes interesting, because essentially it's not slavery that's really the problem. But this second part, which becomes very, very interesting, is this involuntary servitude, basically having to provide service without consent. Now that's a very, very interesting thing, because when we look at what has been done with it, like let's say for instance if you're a business and you refuse to sell to people based on religious grounds, well, essentially they try to say, well, you refuse to sell to them based on certain things, and that violates their right, and that should be enforced. Well, essentially what you're doing is you're essentially violating the business owner's rights by violating the 13th Amendment. It doesn't matter that you try to say that within the civil rights that of the other person, there is always going to be a person that's going to sell them baked goods or whatever the case may be. And the market is going to adapt to that because, frankly, when there's money to be made, people are always going to be there. This isn't the case where we're not in the case anymore where we have whole towns that essentially conspire. And that goes under collusion, and we have actually business laws against that. There's actually business laws that go against collusion, and this even impacts even to the world of gambling. If you go into a poker tournament and you try to work with another player to essentially win at the tables and try to win the money, and you essentially share your cards with another player, and this is essentially pre-planned, that's collusion, and both of you could be kicked out. And not only that, you could actually be fined by the actual tournament itself because that goes down as collusion. And collusion is a serious penalty that is viewed in the United States for both in the world of gaming and in the world of business itself in general. So that has no longer been an actual case. That's why when it comes down to it, the actual problem we have is not this idea of where people can't have access to business, which would be collusion. It's this idea that we have this idea of involuntary servitude. And this is why no one's looking at this angle with it. This essentially where the government tries to force people to provide service. And we found this in multiple occasions with it, where they say, oh, you have to bake this cake for this gay couple with it. And we have these, most of the time it's a lot of gay couples that are targeting Christian bakers, because we have yet to see the cases where they've gone after Muslim bakers because we know we know people have gone into to just question the idea and gone into Muslim bakers to see if they would do the same thing, just in the actual case, and they've said that they refuse to do so. But so we know that it's actually aimed at these specific Christian conservative bakers. Now I'm not going to comment on either way with it if I think it's the right decision. To me, I think you should basically just go along and move along for your money and go along and do it. And but the fact is the market will supply the thing and benefit those who supply the best thing and hurt those who don't. And when it comes down to it, is frankly what you should realize is that even in anything in culinary arts, which is where I came from before my disability, is that basically is you don't want to anger the people who actually make your food. You do that and you're going to end up with something very, very poor quality. I hate to tell you this, but that's the truth. And it can get really, really bad real fast because they do not take kindly to being insulted. And it can be anywhere from them deliberately trying to ruin your food to basically that's in anything from an actual restaurant to if it's baked goods. Essentially they're going to be putting in the worst possible effort if they're not interested. So essentially, you're going to, if that's a gay wedding, they're basically going to be putting in a half-assed effort. And so when we're looking at this, is you don't want to do that, and that's not actually in the best interest of those who want that cake. They can say, "Oh, this is a better baker with it." Well, you know you're not going to get the quality product when it comes down to that baker anyway, because they're not going to have the interest into making that product, even if you force them. And this is why you don't want force to be used. Now we need to look at another area which that a lot of people don't think about, which is actually the military draft. The military draft is, again, involuntary servitude. Now, it does not state anything about here when it says pay. Involuntary servitude is still with pay. You're still paying them, but you're stating that they have no decision whether or not to work. And this is a big problem, because it's basically stating that they have to do it under penalty of basically under penalty of law or whatever the case may be, that they have no decision otherwise. And that's what involuntary servitude is. Slavery is actually where they're actually owned property, but involuntary servitude means that they cannot that they have no decision otherwise, and if they violate that, there is legal repercussions for doing so. The last one would be if we is in the case of when we talk about forcing the idea of going to a single payer universal healthcare system. Now, this is the whole thing of what it would take. Well, we know right away that it would take basically people under the role of doctors to take a 30% pay cut. It would also make doctors have to take a pay cut as well, and they could be variable depending how many people they get in. And then when we have this, they don't have the right to say, yes, we're going to see you as a patient. No, we're not going to see you as a patient, based on what their workload is, basically they feel if they want to deal with a certain patient, because the patient could be difficult and could essentially just flat out want to reject their medical opinion, and they could essentially be a very difficult patient to have, and it's not something they want, or they could not have the actual room to add on for the workload. Well, the government comes in and says, no, you can't do that. You have no right to do that. And this goes into involuntary servitude. The government tells you you have no right to make any of these decisions. These are our calls. We tell you who you see, who you can't see. We dictate how much you get paid, where you get paid, when you get paid, and we basically decide that your workers below have to work for less no matter what. Now, that is involuntary servitude as well. And people are saying, oh, but it helps so many people. Well, so did slavery. When we look at slavery produced a lot of goods for people. That helped a lot of people. That got people a lot of different goods, real cheap. Do we say that slavery is a good thing? No, we don't. We actually admonish slavery as being one of the worst things that has ever happened to this actual globe, and we state that basically what happened in the Western world when they actually decided to end slavery from what was occurring in Africa and the Middle East, and when we killed it in the Western world, was the best thing going. When the Arabs and the West African cultures sold the West slaves, and eventually led to the the ending of, and then eventually we came to the point of ending slavery out in the West. That was essentially the best thing that we could have done. Going backwards and saying we're going to decide what you can do, what you can't do, and as businesses, and then doing that to actual doctors and medical workers. Basically, a lot of these medical workers are pretty much working week to week because they're not making that much money. And then when you're saying, we're going to take 30% more of your money because we need to make sure that these medical prices are low. And they're doing that, and then basically it takes money out of those people's pockets. There's reasons why the medical costs are high, and the reason why is because you're paying for a lot of different workers, and there's a lot of different services added on. And the reason why insurance is high is because there's so many things demanded by your actual governments, from your state governments. You don't need all these. Not everybody needs all these things, and that's where everything gets jacked up in price. And then when you have the actual federal government doing this, you need to get rid of a lot of this bureaucracy that's actually causing the high prices. Going to a thing that's actually saying we're going to force people to do this without their actual consent. Well, that doesn't solve anything. All it does is basically violate the 13th Amendment. And that's all you're doing. And you need actual consent with the actual people. If we're going to announce ourselves as an actual free country, you have to follow the 13th Amendment. This means it applies to business owners, and it applies to actual free individuals to choose their own work. This doesn't mean, hey, you work for what we say you work for, and you're gonna take in the people that we say you take in. That's not a free country. That's an involuntary servitude. Doesn't matter if we're talking about the draft. Doesn't matter if we're talking about trying to force in single-payer health care. That's horrible. And that's basically what people on the left want to do. And there's even social justice libertarians that basically say that it's just fine to force people. This is what came down in a debate on for the Libertarian Party nominee. And when it was basically an argument between Johnson and Peterson, and Peterson was on the right side. When Peterson said, "Can you force a Jewish baker to bake a Nazi cake?" And it made an awkward moment because the fact is Johnson knew that you couldn't. And the fact is it's no different. When you start to change these positions around, you realize how wrong it is. And it doesn't matter who the actual parties are. You cannot force anybody to do anything. That's involuntary servitude. And you have and everybody has the freedom to actually discriminate in their own way. I mean, look way the actual free market works. What makes someone choose one business over another to go to? What made them actually choose one baker to go to that one baker over every other baker? That's discrimination. Should those individuals that were going to buy those wedding cakes, should they be charged with violating the Constitution? Because they were using discrimination right there. And that's what we need to be taught. That's what should be talked about right there. Because when we're looking at discrimination, that's clearly discrimination. And discrimination is basically all it is making a decision. And you go, oh, but it wasn't discrimination like about a sexual preference or race or any of these other things. And it doesn't matter. A decision is a decision. The same outcome is. You can't slap anything else on top of it and think that you're getting this. And you're getting the same results. The fact is discrimination is discrimination no matter what the reasoning is. And the fact is, it's perfectly fine and perfectly legal to do that. Because the fact is what is actually the problem is not discrimination. The actual problem out there is actually collusion. And that's where it becomes a legal matter. Is actually where you have a bunch of people going against another group. And that's where you have an actual problem. And we can talk about that with social media of collusion. We can talk about that, how in the past it was basically whole cities. The reason why the actual civil rights amendments were passed referring to that was because whole cities would actually say, we're not selling to you. They would go to the next city, and the whole city would say, we're not selling to you. That's collusion. It had nothing to do with discrimination. They knew that there was they knew that there would be discrimination from one to the next with it. They expected that to happen. But they wanted basically the normal access of an actual market to actually occur. They just like basically the black people that were out there with it. They were going to discriminate against from one business to the next just naturally, and they knew that was going to happen. They weren't looking for getting rid of discrimination. They were looking to actually get rid of actual cases to where they could actually do business. That's all they wanted. They wanted to basically have the option of doing business, and there was going to be a person there was going to be people out there that were more interested in the money, which is the right way to go, than actually some type of internal prejudice. And that's what they wanted. They wanted actually a fair access to it. They weren't concerned about discrimination. They were concerned about collusion. And that's the whole point. And when they bring out, but there's prejudice. But there's people that are actually making these decisions based on prejudice. And making decisions, all these decisions. Everybody does it every day. What makes you decide to go to one restaurant over another, what makes you decide to buy one product over another, it's all the same thing. It doesn't matter. It all means the same thing. What the problem is when we have collusion. This is where when somebody cannot buy another product, where they have no access to any other options, and they're actually forced in that realm to basically essentially adjust their actual nature and essentially abide by some type of rule that should never exist. This is like such as happening on we could say social media is doing this essentially because there's only certain major social media things out there, and what they're doing is essentially causing the same things that the blacks had options with it, and there was no option to go for social media that was actually going to be fair and make options where all people were welcome. And that's the whole point. And it's not like, but there's certain people that are hateful. No, this isn't even like certain people are hateful. This is basically where they're targeting. And that's basically what they did back then. And they basically, this isn't what, they did the same thing of basically claiming that blacks were a subspecies, and they're doing the same thing on social media. They're claiming that libertarians and conservatives are subspecies people. And they're just copying the same thing that they did back then that the KKK was doing, working with the Democratic Party. And it's the same thing. They're just recopying what they were doing from the middle 1800s on down through the civil rights period. And they're just recopying the old playbook. It's just they're doing it from a digital realm. and they're basically the same people, and they're basically doing the same old things. Now, you're gonna find bad people from all walks of life, but the fact is this is what we're talking about here. And when what people want is they don't want, when it comes down to it, they don't want no no discrimination. Discrimination happens all the time. You discriminate against certain companies. You say, I don't like this company because they do testing on animals. That's discrimination. You say, I don't like this company because they support a political party that I don't like. You do this. You do discrimination against that other company because you say, I don't like their political beliefs. You say you do discrimination against that other company because you say, I just don't like the way their product tastes. Well, that's discrimination. All of it is. What the whole problem boils down to is not discrimination. It's collusion. It's when you get a whole group of people that say, you're not welcome, we're going to make sure that you can't be here. And this is what happens. And this is why they actually put up the law. The law was actually not meant to refer to discrimination. The law was meant to refer to actually collusion. Discrimination, they knew was going to happen. You can't get rid of discrimination because they understood that discrimination didn't only happen in that manner. They knew that people were going to make decisions on products, and essentially you could have companies saying, hey, there's people discriminating in my product, they're buying my consumer's product. I mean, Coke could have used discrimination law against Pepsi and saying there's people buying other products than mine with it. I want these people put in jail. They're violating the Constitution. Well, is that right? No, because the fact is all they were doing was merely basically making a choice on a product. Yes, it's discrimination, but that's basically how we do things. The problem is collusion. The problem would be with it is if Coke would have bought out Pepsi and RC. And said, you don't have any other options out there, you're only going to buy my product with it, and I'm going to do whatever I want, and basically we're going to make sure that only people that we want can buy the product, and we're not going to sell this to, let's say, black people or Asians or whatever type of group you want to do, or Latinos. And this is what we're going to do. Or we're just going to put products that we think that's it's going to sell in those areas with it. We're not going to allow you to have these access to other products. And that's essentially what you're doing, is you're essentially blocking people out. And that's what the idea is, and this is where we get the idea of collusion. Is when all of those businesses and all of those towns are saying, no, you can't buy. You get out of my restaurant because I'm not selling to you. And they would go from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, and they were not allowed when it came down to basically just using water fountains. There were basically separate water fountains, and they wanted the end of it. They wanted to basically all they wanted was equality. And that's basically not what we're seeing today. We're seeing the fact is they want basically separation. They want basically to go back to the way it was before, where you have segregation. We see the same people, and it's basically just a repeat. It's the liberals doing it again, and they want segregation, and they hate they hate the people that basically push for actual equality. And they're using essentially the word of equality when it doesn't even mean that. And basically they're saying, oh, we shouldn't have and they keep they'll make up the word of the day within, and they talk about equal rights and all these other things like this, and they don't even mean it. They don't even mean any of this stuff. And this is why when we talk about the idea of involuntary servitude, this is where things should be very, very important, because we're not going to have slavery anymore. This is basically so damned of a word. It's basically has such a negative meaning that we're never going to have this out here in the Western world. I mean, yes, it exists in Islamic cultures to where they do this, especially in Sunni Islamic cultures where they still practice this to this day, but they don't do this in Western cultures, in anything, or even in, for the most part, East Asian cultures. They don't do this. It's just basically it's considered to be horrible activity. Now, but what the big deal with it is involuntary servitude. They don't exactly take that seriously. They tend to brush over it and ignore it as if it doesn't exist. Meaning, we have people that still support the draft. That's involuntary servitude. We have people that support basically forcing businesses to serve the people when it's totally against their idea of their actual business that they started to begin with. That's their business. If they don't want to serve with it, the actual market will kill them for not serving. We don't have collusion now. We don't have collusion for the most part in these areas, because people will say, you know what, that business won't serve the gay people. Okay, you'll have the next business that will, and they'll basically say there'll be a lot of people that'll be upset about that, and there'll be people that want to boycott that business and say, I'm not going to order from them anymore. And there'll be some people that'll support them for doing so with it, and everything works out. And when it comes down to it, this is the way things go. Now, when we look at the idea of, this is why we look at the idea of this single payer or medical single payer universal health care for medicine, because when they're talking about it, they're talking about getting rid of all private health insurance, which means the actual outcome is that the people who are actually working under these doctors automatically, because of the forced price reduction, take a 30% price cut because they're unwilling to get rid of the FDA. They've already stated that the FDA is staying. Well, because they're beholden to the FDA. Specifically, guys like Cory Booker, because Cory Booker makes a lot of money when Pfizer donates to his campaign. They're beholden to big pharmaceuticals. The people who basically said we support, pretty much if you look behind the people who say we support single payer health care, look at who's donating to their campaign, because most likely it's big pharmaceuticals, because they know, and it's not going to be the insurance companies, because insurance companies are losing out. So it's going to be big pharmaceuticals, because big pharmaceuticals know that they can still charge these high prices, and that's going to be the bulk of the cost of these things. And that they basically then can charge whatever they want. And what's going to happen is when you go for your medicine, the government's going to say, you know what, no, that's not going to be covered anymore. And that's going to come completely out of pocket. The government's going to have this thin little line of one medicine from each little category that's going to be covered, and everything else is going to be on you. So then when you're spending basically this huge amount of money out of pocket, and you just caused all these medical workers to have to basically serve the government without consent, and serve it at about 70% of the rate of the salary when they were living week to week to begin with, and they're doing so, and you're basically cause all of this harm to these people. You basically say, well, I didn't know that I was going to have to pay for my medicine completely out of pocket with this. And you just basically cause all this harm to people. It doesn't mean free health care. You're basically, a lot of this is going to be limited to what they're going to do, because the fact is the government's going to say we can't cover that. They're going to say with surgeries, we can't cover that. They're going to say with basic procedures, we can't cover that. You want to meet with that specialist? Sorry, but no. But I thought I could meet with these people in the same way I could in with a normal healthcare provider insurance. Well, no, because it's government insurance. Even with the people that actually go to other countries, the fact is they have to wait, and they have to wait a long time. It doesn't matter what type of government healthcare they have. You look in England, I mean, even in the best case scenario, they're going in with even with when they set up appointments. This is when they set up appointments to see their doctor. They're waiting usually 45 minutes after the appointment's set. This is best case scenario. And this is basically noted by people. When you go to the ER, expect to wait a minimum 8 hours. A minimum 8 hours to actually get what you need done. And this is basically what you're doing. You're making people become essentially slaves to the government. They're still making their money, but they're basically the government's telling them how much they can make, and they're going to be making a lot less because of this. And that's because you decided that because you didn't understand how this system works, you decided that you needed this. And this is why the idea of involuntary servitude needs to really be looked at. And this is something that's very dangerous, especially for Western countries. Because there's a lot of people with it. You'll basically say, "Hey, I'm this concerned about me getting free stuff." Well, did you ever think about the other person that actually has to provide this stuff? That they don't get a consent in this? Do you ever think about these people? Now they're going to interview a couple of people with it that basically look like they're doctors or look like they're nurses that say, "Yay, we're for single payer." Do you ever think they might just be actors? A lot of times that's what they are, because the fact is that's usually who they're getting. And the fact is they're not looking at the real people who are actually affected by this. The real people who are affected by this, they're expected to make a lot less money. And if this is done through the Green New Deal, guess what? They're going to essentially have to take 100% of their money. This is what we talk about being realistic. Because the fact is you only can take so much money above budget to actually pass tax deals. Even if you're going massively high in taxes, but the way the taxes would have to go is, guess what? Everybody making $30,000 and more would have to be taxed at 100%. That means essentially you're saying, okay, those people that are workers in the medical field, yeah, you're going to take a 30% loss here, and yeah, we're going to take all your money. Then they're going to say, how am I going to live? Oh, we're going to give you a little bit extra food, and yeah, we'll give you an electric car, and we'll pay for schooling. They're going to say, well, how does that help? They're going to actually ask, how does that help? They're going to actually starve to death because these people are actually going to starve to death and basically die because of the fact of you wanted free stuff and you wanted this horrible plan that is not attainable. And this is where we get these people that don't even think. They're asking for a plan that would cost the average household basically about $600,000 a year. And I don't think that's exactly fair. And that's essentially what you're doing. Because you just want this huge bill of goods. And basically none of these households make that money, so even if you're going to be basically taxing a bunch of other people at this high rate, and even businesses, and this is assuming the businesses are going to stay, because no one's going to want to invest in them, and they're going to be leaving, and it's going to cause the essential whole economy to shut down. And this is why we don't like involuntary servitude, because this is what it does. They're not thinking about the individual. They're thinking about how much money can we steal for the state. And it's all about state power. The complete opposite of why we actually have a constitution. I know this is a little bit longer than usual, but this is very important. And most people on the left don't understand this. They just think about, oh, I want to get medical coverage. Well, you're not going to get it that way. You need to understand you get it through voluntary associations, and you want these large voluntary associations. You wanted basically the option of buying insurance in any state, because this allows the states to compete with each other for the regulations. And then you want basically so that they basically will be inclined to reduce their regulations. Then what you want to do is you essentially want to make sure that you can buy what you want to buy. You don't want to buy everything. I mean, if you're a single male in their 20s, you don't want to buy maternity coverage. That makes no sense. I mean, you're not going to want to buy that with it because it doesn't make sense for you. So you only want to buy the things that make sense for you. I mean, as I think it makes sense by like with a pizza. This is one thing that's Remy, the comedian and libertarian, that does a lot of humorous videos with it. He does like humorous videos, also a lot of videos that kind of joke about libertarian issues as well. And he's basically compared it to a pizza, basically like going in and making mandating that everybody gets about 80 toppings on their pizza, just mandating them. Well, the fact is this would basically make every pizza cost so much that no one could actually afford it, and basically no one could basically afford that pizza. And when you actually make pizza, people actually get what they want. You'll actually see that it becomes a lot more affordable for each person, and they can actually buy the specific type of insurance. Now you can do that. You can also get rid of the FDA. Now people are going to say, well, who's going to test the products? Well, same idea as we do for electronics. Electronics have Underwriters Laboratories, which is an independent firm. We'll have independent firms for actually medicine. This means that they don't have to actually get approved by the actual government, who knows nothing about medicine. And this will actually reduce the actual cost. It'll actually reduce the backlog, because a lot of times the FDA is actually being bought off to block these generic drugs, which is actually causing a huge backlog in the actual price. And they're just doing this to essentially ensure that these other companies are doing this. Now, essentially, it's the government only has an obligation so a company has enough time to develop their product. It's not to protect their product for years to come. It's only enough time to develop their product and sell their product. That's it. Beyond that point, with it, they have no right to have their product being protected beyond that point. Now, this is why when we get to this point of this, you'll see. For those who want that medical care cost to be lower, you'll see it can be very, very cheap then. And you basically make this idea of this voluntary association to be very, very huge. Now, you can do this for whatever type of group we're talking about. I mean, it could be anything from like the NRA to any type of union you belong to any other type of group. And these groups could be basically as large as can be, to basically like a seniors, any type of seniors group like AARP or something. And when you start looking at it, these could essentially be so large that you could essentially grab what would be beneficial for these people, and they would negotiate on your behalf, giving you the best option for healthcare. And this allows you to essentially get the lowest reduced price. This is what allows people like such as, in my dad's case, the National Association of Letter Carriers, to actually get an excellent price on healthcare and get a very, very nice lucrative package. Now, you can actually do this when we're talking about what's happening with healthcare. But the fact is You're never going to get this. You're actually going the opposite direction by going after a centralized government healthcare system. You're going in the exact opposite direction. So what the idea is you don't want to do that, because that's basically pushing for involuntary servitude for a group of people. And it's not right, because you're basically telling the people that are offering you health care, you're basically telling them that you don't care about their lives, and basically you can care less what actually happens to them. So guess what's going to happen when you walk in with it? They're not going to be happy people, because you essentially just voted for them to basically lose 30% of their pay, just because you wanted to basically not worry about paying for health care. They're not going to, trust me, when you walk in that office, they're not going to be happy. Just like they weren't happy about the passage of the ACA, because it meant more paperwork in their damn hands. If you talk to any of these people with it, they're going to explain you how basically the ACA, all it did was give them more work, and they'll roll their eyes when it comes to the actual passage of the ACA. They hate it. They don't like that. They don't like all this regulation that gets passed. They want their lives to be easier, and they want it to basically be an actual patient and doctor relationship, and actually the patient doctor and with the actual staff, and the staff and everybody wants this. And they're not going to get this when you get to a more centralized system. It's going to get worse. And if you want to know what's universal health care is going to be like in this country, go ask the VA. Go look up some of the actual stories, what happened with the VA. How when the list gets so long with it, they just make another list and they scratch off the people who die. And that's what happens. You're not going to get it better. You're not going to make it better. You're just going to make the lives of the actual medical workers worse, and they're not going to be happy about that. And when you come in with it, you better not mention that you voted for the person that wanted universal health care, because they're going to kind of give you a little bit of a dirty look, because you just made their life a living hell. You said, "Hey, I want to steal 30% of your money, make it pay higher taxes, and then make you actually be conscripted to actually accept whoever the government tells you to accept to work for, and not actually have the actual right to actually choose who you accept as patients." Trust me, they're not going to be happy. Now, if you like this, like, subscribe, click the notification bell, make sure to share us on social media. Make sure to check out my Patreon page. Make sure to share my Patreon page if you can. And that's about it. Bye, everyone.